Hello, everyone, and welcome back to My Thoughts. Today, we are in the third episode of My Thoughts when we talk about Moon Knight. But before we begin, just want to give a quick recap and thank everybody for checking out my first two episodes. Of course, my first episode, we dived into She Hulk, and my second episode, we've dived into Miss Marvel. And what this series is we will be ranking all seven of the MCU Disney Plus shows for Phase 4, and then we'll move on to the movies. And of course, we are doing them in reverse order for the shows. So just to recap again, She-Hulk received my sixth ranking, so that means that it is the sixth best show out of the seven, in my opinion. And Miss Marvel received the seventh, so it is the worst show out of the lot, even though I really don't think Miss Marvel is a bad show per se. So we will be talking about the rest of the shows. I mean, you can only go up from here, right? We've got the final two, the last spots out of the way. So all the rest of the shows have to rank higher. And also, before I get into the actual discussion, I want to note that I'm recording this in a different location. So hopefully next episode, when we talk about Hawkeye, the audio will be a little bit more normal. So if it sounds different, just want to give some background as to why. And I also want to start off by saying that before we get into Moon Knight, I think it's important to note that Moon Knight might be the most different out of all of these MCU shows. And I say that as in you either really like it or you really don't. I've talked with many people, friends, and just other people who I talk MCU shows with, and I've had people rank this show as high as the best Disney Plus series in Phase 4, all the way to the worst. And I think it's important just to note that, your opinion on the show is probably really going to change based on what this show is actually about. And we'll get into that. You're going to see where I fall on it, but I do think it's important to note that because I think this is probably one of the harder to rank shows out of all of them, if I'm being honest. So, with that being said, we have to start off by talking about Moon Knight himself. A lot of people like to say that he is the MCU version of Batman, but I really don't think that's the case. Batman is he's a millionaire. He funds himself. He makes his own suits. He is a detective. Moon Knight gets his powers from a god, Khonshu. He possesses some superpowers when he's in his form, but he still overall is mortal. He can still, feel pain to some degree, and he can change back into a mortal form as soon as he's done being Moon Knight. And he brings a lot of important aspects into the comics and also into the MCU now with the introduction of how God's powers work. I think it was really interesting to see that, in this series, we got to really explore that side of things, which, of course, we all know Thor, we all know Loki, but we really didn't get to see how big G gods interact with mortals, and I thought that was pretty cool. Now, Moon Knight himself, he first appeared in 1975's Werewolf by Night number 32. So, kind of interesting, it's Halloween just around the corner, and we're talking about Moon Knight, who appeared in Werewolf by Night, the Halloween special in the MCU. So, pretty interesting. And again, I think Moon Knight's a cool character. He's one of the more obscure characters, if I'm being honest, which I sort of enjoy the fact that Marvel is putting a lot more obscure characters into the spotlight, especially in the Disney Plus shows. And I'm really glad that Moon Knight got his own series. So, to start off, as always, with the pros, I already sort of mentioned it. I got so excited about it, I couldn't help myself. But it expanded the MCU in a meaningful way. More so than any of the other series that we talked about, this really did expand a core concept in the MCU and added something that we've never really seen before, and that I think you can easily see is going to be a much more expansive sort of idea and concept moving forward, which is gods interacting with mortals and using them to do their bidding. In fact, we sort of saw this in Thor Love and Thunder. I've not seen many people talk about it, but Thor granted his powers to the children in the final fight, similarly to how Khonshu grants Mark Spector and Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley his powers, basically based on some sort of contract. Now, I don't know if Thor's powers and Khonshu's powers work exactly the same. That'll be something for a, later movie to explore. But I think it's important to note that this is something that I think out of all the series we've seen, this really explored a side of the MCU that hadn't even been touched, and I think it did an effective job of showing this side. Now, there are some issues that I will bring up in a little bit regarding this as well, but overall, I think they did a fantastic job. Now, one other thing that I really liked about this is Arthur Harrow. I thought Arthur Harrow was an incredible, incredible villain. Now, there are many critics of villains in the MCU. In fact, I think that maybe the only two villains that I'd say there are three villains that get a pass overall. You have Thanos, you have Loki, and then if you count Daredevil's Kingpin, I think that Kingpin gets a pass. And we will be talking about Kingpin next week, mind you. But I think that Kingpin from the Daredevil Netflix series gets a pass. And I'm sure there are some other ones as well that get a pass, but those are just the three that sort of pop up off the top of my head. But I thought Arthur Harrow was great. I think that saying that he was a former, he used to work for Khonshu, I thought that was an extremely, sort of emotional thing. Because all this time we thought that he was just working for Amit and that, he was this bad guy, when in reality, he used to work for Khonshu. And Khonshu has history with this individual, and, from his point of view, Khonshu was the villain, and, we really got an insight into, his character, where he came from. And I thought that was really awesome. I know that there are some people who thought that he was not a great villain, and I do understand that his, character arc has some shortcomings, but I will say I don't think he's nearly as bad as, someone like Yellow Jacket from Ant-Man. And I really appreciated him, and I appreciated his performance overall. And speaking of performances, it has to be said that Oscar Isaac's portrayal of Mark Spector and Stephen Grant was phenomenal. Now, I'll be honest with you, Oscar Isaac is a hit or miss actor for me. And that's probably because the two things that I first think of him as, before thinking of Moon Knight, of course, would be Apocalypse from X-Men Apocalypse and Poe Dameron from Star Wars. And I don't think that, especially not Apocalypse, but I think Poe Dameron's more debatable. But in my opinion, I don't think either of those are great performances. So I probably don't have as positive as of a view as Oscar Isaac as some might have, but I thought he killed it in this performance. How he respectfully portrayed someone who's going through a real psychological struggle, how he switched back and forth between the personalities. The accent for Stephen Grant really didn't bother me as much as some people, but then again, half the time I think that people just find random things to nitpick with these shows. But I thought Oscar Isaac, you could tell he was very intentional with what he did, and he was very intentional in the decisions and acting choices he made, and I very much appreciated that. I thought he did a fantastic job. And lastly, I will say this because the next 4 series or so that we're going to be talking about have this sort of central issue. And Moon Knight was one, and I actually think She-Hulk as well did this very effectively. There were no pointless cameos, no pointless cameos. And again, we will talk about it more in depth with the next few shows we'll be talking about. But that's probably been one of my bigger issues with MCU Phase 4 as a whole, and I really appreciated how Moon Knight felt like it was its own thing. It wasn't trying to, push these other characters in. Now let's talk about the cons. And I think to start off the bat, sort of to push back on my expand the MCU in a meaningful way, this story is very hard to understand. And I completely understand that, and I understand that is why a lot of people were really put off by this show. Unless you had the mental capacity to sort of, you know, key into everything that happened, it was very hard to follow. In fact, even for me, someone who is a fairly big MCU fan, watches a lot of breakdown videos after each show, it took me until about my second watch to really start getting a understanding of fully what was going on. Now, again, I might be speaking for myself here when I say, like I had a hard time following some stuff, but I mean, it was a confusing show at times, and I think that probably was off putting to a lot of more casual MCU fans. And I think that it's worth noting that, that is it's a true shortcoming of this show in some ways, is that I heard from a lot of people that there were certain parts where they just had a very hard time following it. I'll also say another con is the final episode, and there's a specific thing in the final episode that I will talk about. But the final episode, after doing everything that was seemingly not, boilerplate MCU content, they decided to have a big battle at the very end. And what's even worse is we don't even get to see the outcome of the big battle, really. We see the aftermath, but we don't get to see how it went down and what happened. I think that, again, this is something that the MCU in general has issues with, is, it sort of follows the same formula of the hero finds himself in a hole, they, get a power, or they learn a new piece of information, they go on this reforming journey, you have a training montage, or you have some big event where they reach their lowest point and then they come back up, that all cultivates in a final battle. And with Moon Knight, things had been going in such a weird direction, with him going to the ancestral plane, the Sea of Reeds, where it almost felt like a complete 180 for them all of a sudden to put in a huge climactic battle at the very end. I know that for some people they really enjoy those, and I enjoyed the final battle all right, but again, I wish that there would have been something different. Something that felt more Moon Knight and less MCU. And lastly, I'll make this one short. I wish that the Jake Lockley reveal was better. I wish we got to see him versus Arthur Harrow. I wish they didn't just show up shooting Arthur Harrow. Again, that's just nitpicky. It's probably a selfish thing on on me to ask for that, because I'm sure we will see him sooner or later. But I was a little disappointed with his reveal. I thought they could have done more. But again, that's just a personal preference for me. But I thought it was warranted being said. Now, in my opinion, the best episode of Moon Knight was episode 5, Asylum. And I think that why this episode works so well is its weirdness. It is a weird episode that really focuses on character more so than anything else. We get a backstory to how Moon Knight's character got multiple personalities, and it was a very, very emotional thing to watch. Watching his backstory, watching how his mother treated him, watching how he reacted when his mother died, and how much resentment he had, and how he created this personality to sort of hide his emotions. It was very difficult to watch. And again, I think that the fact that they were portraying such a difficult psychological feeling like that in a very, very, I think, tasteful way. They're not making fun of it. They are trying to portray it as best they can. I thought it was fantastic, and I think it genuinely gave depth to a character in the MCU that we have not seen in a very long time. And I don't know how you can watch that episode and truly not connect with Moon Knight as a character at some point. Because, you have to feel for him. You feel for what he's gone through, and you want him to succeed. And I think that's always the mark of a good character, and you want them to succeed. Now, the worst episode, in my opinion, is episode 3, The Friendly Type. I'll be honest with you. When I was going back and looking at all the episodes, I sort of remembered a few things from each, but I completely just blanked on what was in this episode, and I think that's an issue. Um, it's a bigger issue because there are some important things that happen here. This is really the episode that drives the main issue for the remainder of the series. Episodes 4, 5, and 6 are all basically results of what happened in this episode. And while it was a toss up between placing this episode and the final episode as the worst overall episode, I gave this one a bit more because, again, while the final episode is bad, I still think that there are some redeeming qualities, such as Layla. I think that her character is great, and I think that her getting powers makes sense. I know there are some people who did not agree with that, but I think it makes sense how they handled her character. And again, I think this episode, just for the sheer forgettableness, has to be last. Because while the last episode might not be good, you at least remember it. This one, I just don't remember at all. So with that being said, we have reached the end of the episode. And I am here to tell you all that out of the 7 Disney Plus series, I'm ranking Moon Knight third out of 7. I think it is the third best series. I think it is in the top 3. Again, I know it's extremely weird, and I know that for some of you, you might think that it is the worst or it is the second to worst. I understand it. And, again, I don't post these to say that I'm right or that this is a definitive list. I post it to start a conversation to share my thoughts. And I hope that you'll share yours with me in the comments below and tell me what you thought about Moon Knight and where you would rank it in your own list. Well, anyways, guys, this has been episode 3 of my thoughts with Moon Knight. Tune in next week where we talk about Hawkeye. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And also just want to quickly say for all of my MCU Power Level series, which, side note, Power Level series will always be my favorite series on my channel. I'm hoping to figure something else out to do like it. I do enjoy this series, but there's nothing quite like Power Levels and making those calculations. They're so fun. That is coming up in the next few weeks. As soon as Black Panther's out, you can expect that video to be up. I pretty much have all the power levels from I Am Groot, Werewolf by Night, and She-Hulk completed. All I'm waiting on is Black Panther, and we will be good to go. So there's something to look forward to, and then not soon after that, we'll be getting the first part of Phase 5 with Guardians of the Galaxy, the Christmas special, Ant-Man, Quantumania, and Secret Invasion. But with that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for sticking through the end to hear about the Power Level series, and I will see you all next episode. Have a great one.